President Lee Jae Myung shares hopes of rebuilding trust and reviving dialogue on the Korean peninsula, while his U.S. and Russian counterparts meet in Alaska amid hopes for an end to the Kremlin's aggression against Ukraine. We have more in Press Perspective today. Hello, hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Press Perspective for this Monday, August 18th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. President Lee Jae Myung has rejected unification on the Korean peninsula via absorption, adding that South Korea respects North Korea's political system. We've more on his remarks, but first we touch upon the recent talks between US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Alaska. For this, I have Celio Fioretti with French daily Le Croix here in the studio. Celio, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here.
I also have Professor Ban Kil Joo at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy live on the line. Professor Ban, it's a pleasure.
Hello, good to be with you.
Right, Celia, we will start here in the studio. So let's begin with a recap of the press announcements, if you will, given by Russia's Vladimir Putin and his US counterpart Donald Trump in Alaska, of course, following their talks last Friday.
Sure. After the 2.5-hour meeting, shorter actually than expected, in Alaska, both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump made short statements. Vladimir Putin spoke first. He praised what he called a constructive and neighborly atmosphere, and even took the opportunity to remind the audience that Alaska once was part of Russia before being sold to the United States. Eventually, he moved on to Ukraine, but not in terms of a ceasefire. Instead, he said that an agreement has been reached and the root causes of the conflict needed to be eliminated before peace could be achieved. In the diplomatic language of the Kremlin, that means Ukraine would first have to accept Russian sovereignty over the disputed territories and renounce its foreign military partnerships. In other words, that's the same idea that Russia has been saying since day one. So it's not there's no breakthrough, and Putin appeared to be very confident, though, during this press conference. Donald Trump, meanwhile, spoke secondly. He spoke briefly. He didn't really mention Ukraine directly. He made no reference to a ceasefire. He described the talks as extremely productive still, claimed there were many points of agreement, and the two sides had made great progress, but he did not offer any single details on the actual talk. He also admitted that we didn't get there, though he added there was a very good chance of progress in the future, and that in the final statements, Vladimir Putin mentioned in English, which is quite rare, that next time will be in Moscow, which Trump replied that it was possible. So I think this really summarized the whole meeting. There was no breakthrough, no deal reached, and on concrete progress on Ukraine, we will have to wait another time in Moscow on Russian soil to maybe have a better hope to reach peace in this conflict.
Right. But in the meantime, Professor Ban, quite a number of pundits believe that the summit was a diplomatic win for Mr. Putin and not so much so for Mr. Trump. What are your takeaways, Professor Ban?
To start with, the Alaska summit received very high attention because this war served as a proxy war between the United States and Russia. And in doing so, this diplomatic venue was taken a rare opportunity for the two leaders under the proxy war to meet directly. Meanwhile, to be honest with you, the Alaska summit was a little disappointing. I believe that Trump won the game tactically, but Putin won the game strategically. On the one hand, Trump won the game tactically in the sense that he was successful in inviting Putin to Alaska, which used to belong to Russia. Furthermore, as you are well aware, the B-2 strategic bomber and technological fighters like F-22s were demonstrated in the air and on the runway. In this sense, Trump was able to demonstrate a show of force in this diplomatic arena while taking advantage of his status as a host. On the other hand, Putin won the game strategically. First, since Putin showed his symbolic gesture of making diplomatic efforts to address the war. So the United States is less likely to take harsh measures against Russia. In the meantime, Russia is more likely to take a more offensive posture on the battlefield while taking advantage of the opportunity that it is winning in the strategic game. In short, Putin bought strategic time and strengthened the justification for continuing the war. Second, Putin mentioned his request to address the root causes of this war directly in front of Trump. His comments are intended to shift the blame for the war to NATO, Europe, and Ukraine, not on him. In this vein, this diplomatic venue provides Putin with an opportunity to step up psychological warfare and cognitive warfare, which are needed to win the war politically. In particular, I would say that Trump won tactically, but Putin won strategically because there was no final agreement or deal. In general, when two leaders meet, it should be the last step to address the quagmire, not the first effort, which means there should be clear agreements at the end of the summit. However, the Alaska summit did not work in this way. So if you ask me who is a bigger winner between Trump as a tactical winner and Putin as a strategic winner, I have to say that Putin is the bigger winner because a strategic win has longer impact on the game.
Right. That being said then, Celio, what has been the response then from Europe with regard to this particular summit?
The reaction to the summit in Europe has been quite sharp, mixed with the different point of view. Many Western officials warned that this was a diplomatic win for Vladimir Putin, and several European leaders, particularly in the North and Baltic states, immediately cautioned that Russia still shows no intention of ending its war in Ukraine, and it cannot be trusted with a peace treaty. It argued that more pressure should be maintained on Russia to deter them for further attack. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz called the image from Alaska disturbing, suggesting that the red carpet treatment that Putin received was too much honor for a president that is still in violation of international law. Even so, Berlin and other European capitals said they were willing to support any diplomatic effort as long as it leads to a real ceasefire and include serious security guarantees for Ukraine. That point, security guarantees, is now at the center of the European diplomacy. Leaders like the French President Emmanuel Macron or British Prime Minister Keir Starmer praised Trump's approach, willingness to explore a peace treaty, but they emphasized that no deal can be reached without Zelensky being at the table of negotiation, and that any agreement must be backed by long-term deterrence measure to make sure that Russia cannot simply regroup and attack in 5 or 10 years later. European officials also make clear that they expect Washington to keep the pressure on Moscow. As the EU foreign policy chief put it, the US is the only actor capable of forcing Russia into serious negotiation. So in short, the Alaska meeting has opened the door for some diplomatic talks, but raised also as many hopes as warnings about maybe a forced deal without Zelensky being at the table.
Right, and speaking about President Zelensky, he is scheduled to sit down with Mr. Trump at the White House in Washington, D.C. That is on this Monday. Professor Ban, what might President Volodymyr Zelensky be seeking to achieve, and what might he be hoping, of course, to avoid during his talks with Mr. Trump?
Well, two things need to be taken into consideration. First, lessons learned. Second, the feasibility of a collective defense guaranteed by the United States. First, President Zelensky will clearly remember that he was insulted at the last February White House meeting with Trump. So I guess he will make good use of the lessons learned and be better prepared for any contingencies. Second, the Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, mentioned that Russia agreed to Article 5-like protection by the United States for Ukraine. It means that Russia still opposes Ukraine's membership in NATO, but the United States might play a role for a security guarantee instead. With this in mind, President Zelensky might face three scenarios. The worst case scenario is that Ukraine abandons the Donbas region, which Russia is eager to take, and the United States provides no security guarantee at all. this is the very case in which Russia becomes a perfect winner and Ukraine becomes a perfect loser. When this scenario takes place, indeed, President Zelensky is most likely to not only lose his political power in domestic politics, but also be recorded in history as a failed leader. So he will be hoping to avoid this scenario. The second scenario is that Ukraine forgives the Donbas region, but instead European forces are deployed to serve as security guarantors in the post-war period. To be more precise, European forces could be dispatched as peacekeepers permanently. This scenario also includes that the United States serve as an indirect security guarantor while providing military assistance and weapons to Ukraine. This is not the worst case scenario, but still the worrying scenario that Zelensky wants to avoid. The third scenario is that Ukraine forgives the Donbas region temporarily in an aim to make an armistice and then negotiates with Russia to have a permanent deal. This scenario includes that both Europe and the United States serve as security guarantors. Ukraine might officially abandon the Crimean Peninsula in order for Russia to agree to the temporary armistice. So this might be neither the best scenario nor the worst case scenario. The third scenario could be better one that Zelensky might be seeking to achieve. Despite the fact that the third scenario is a better one, this will not be an easy option for Ukraine to officially take because this decision will have a big and long-lasting negative impact on its history and sovereignty. So the upcoming summit will not only be important, but also very tough.
Right, for sure. Very tough. And hopefully we'll know more about it once it takes place in Washington, D.C. later on this Monday, local time, of course. Celio, let's now move or turn our attention, that is, to an event that took place here in South Korea. Also last Friday, President Lee Jae Myung was officially ushered into the top office on the same day that the country celebrated its 80th anniversary of liberation from Japanese colonial rule. Could you walk us through the message shared by the president as Korea seeks a path forward from its painful chapter in history?
Yes, it was a highly symbolic moment. South Korean President Lee Jae Myung marked his official inauguration ceremony and also with a speech that remembered the 80th anniversary of the Japanese liberation from Japanese colonial rule. And the tone he chose was very future-oriented. Rather than focusing on past grievance, President Lee Jae Myung called for mutually beneficial cooperation. And he said it was time to step into the future while still remembering the past and looking at it. He acknowledged that some Koreans continue to suffer from unresolved historical issues, but he emphasized that Korea and Japan share the same yard. It's a phrase he used before to express this idea of unavoidable interdependence between Korea and Japan. Importantly, he did not raise the specific demands over wartime issues such as forced labor or sexual slavery, which his predecessor often mentioned during Liberation Day speeches. Instead, he expressed the hope that Japan would show sincerity in facing its history and maintain trust in the relationship going forward. The broader reaction to this speech was although a bit mixed. Many welcomed the pragmatic approach by President Lee Jae Myung, especially coming before the future summit with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba later this month. But several history-related civic organizations expressed disappointment, saying that the president missed an opportunity to restate clear principles regarding historical justice and victims' rights. So overall, Lee Jae Myung's message was cautious of optimism, signaling a really openness to Japan and willing to move forward in this now very complicated world, especially in the region. But something I think we should keep worried about or be careful about is that in Japan these days, even though also it's a reciprocal sentiment to willingly to work with Korea, we have seen in the recent election in Japan that the far right is rising, and on the far right parties, their relationship with history is a bit more complicated because many politicians there refuse to acknowledge the crimes of the past, and that will cause maybe some problems later, maybe in the decades to come, if these parties could grow more in Japan. That would be even harder to maintain a good relationship with Tokyo.
Right. In the meantime, though, Professor Ban, as Celio mentioned, President Lee Jae Myung is scheduled to make a summit visit to Japan this coming weekend ahead of a similar call to the U.S. What, Professor Ban, are the diplomatic implications of this reality?
Well, I would say that the South Korea-Japan summit, which will be held ahead of the South Korea-US summit, has implications in three ways. First, policy continuity. Second, the trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Japan. And finally, stepping up its leverage over the United States. First of all, the bilateral cooperation between South Korea and Japan is required not simply by specific leaders' policy interests, but by structural factors. The geopolitical crisis is rising due to North Korea's offensive nuclear posture. To top it up, rules-based maritime order is weakened in the Indo-Pacific region. This geopolitical crisis encourages two strong countries in the region, South Korea and Japan, to step up their cooperation. In the meantime, the upcoming South Korea-Japan summit can serve as proof of the policy continuity for the shuttle diplomacy in a situation where a structural factor drives the bilateral cooperation between the two countries. Second, the consecutive summits, which are the South Korea-Japan summit and the South Korea-US summit, show to the international community that these three countries are more than willing to make coordinated efforts for international security as well as regional stability in the Pacific. In particular, this summit will serve as a diplomatic venue where the new ROK administration is willing to play enhanced role in international and regional stability. So this line of diplomatic efforts can contribute to upgrading its national prestige in the world. Third, since the Trump administration supports a trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Japan, the fact that the new ROK president is visiting Japan ahead of the South Korea-US summit helps South Korea step up its leverage over the United States. The upcoming ROK-US summit is most likely to serve as a venue for making hard deals. In this sense, upgrading South Korea's leverage over the United States matters to seize the initiative of the upcoming deal.
Right. Meanwhile, Celio, with regard to North Korea, President Lee Jae Myung ruled out, as I mentioned in the short clip at the start of our talk, unification by absorption on the Korean peninsula. What exactly did President Lee Jae Myung say, and what has been the response to his remarks?
Well, President Lee Jae Myung, again in his Liberation Day speech, made important remarks regarding North Korea, breaking from the hardline approach that the past administration had. He explicitly ruled out any kind of unification by absorption, saying Seoul respects the North's current system and has no intention of engaging in hostile acts. In other words, he signaled that South Korea is not trying to overthrow the regime in the North or force it into reunification on Seoul's term. Lee Jae Myung argued that inter-Korean dialogue has been frozen for the previous government and called this 80th anniversary of liberation an opportune moment to move away from a confrontational approach and toward more of a peaceful coexistence between the two countries. He also confirmed that his government will take a gradual confidence-building step. He mentioned also today that they will try to move and to implement the treaties that were made before in the inter-Korean treaties from 2018. So that's the goal, I think, for this administration over the next years, to really improve the guarantees of peace on the Korean peninsula. The broader reaction to this speech was also mixed. In South Korea, Lee Jae Myung's message was welcomed by moderates as a more pragmatic and realistic approach about North Korea, one that could reduce tension and reopen maybe channels of communication between the two countries. But conservatives criticize it as a naive, warning that it sends the wrong message to Pyongyang, that there's no really you gave something, but you don't expect something back from the North, and that would maybe not be useful in the long run. And in the North, in North Korea, the response was quite blunt. Even before the speech, Kim Jong-un's sister, dismissed the overtures as a pipe dream and saying that Pyongyang is not interested into any kind of discussion for the moment. So we see what's going to happen. But for now, any chance of communication, of dialogue between the two countries really lies into Pyongyang's hand.
Right. And then, Professor Ban, again, do help us understand the broader implications of this new stance toward North Korea by the Lee Jae Myung administration with regard to peace and security here on the Korean Peninsula.
To start with, the new Rock administration stresses pragmatic diplomacy, where three items are at the forefront. First, the future-oriented Rock-US alliance. Second, inclusive diplomacy with non-like-minded countries. And easing tensions on the Korean Peninsula. All three items require a policy strategy, but the last one is the hardest. What is the last? What makes the last objective harder than others? First, North Korea believes that it is successful with strategic deals with its allies, such as Russia. So Pyongyang is less motivated to make diplomatic efforts with South Korea and the United States. Second, the Kim regime believes that North Korea has become a nuclear power state now, and by doing so, the denuclearization of North Korea should not be a diplomatic agenda at all. Since this objective is the hardest, the new Rock administration is in a situation where Seoul takes good measures against Pyongyang first in a unilateral way. In this phase one, South Korea might not ask for reciprocal good measures from North Korea because Pyongyang has little motivation. In this sense, even unilateral good measures might be needed for an early effort to ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula. In the meantime, two aspects need to be cautious in order to make the Indo-Korean cooperation viable in a sustainable way. First, South Korea's unilateral good measures should not result in weakening national security or military readiness. In this vein, good measures should take place along with the upgraded deterrence. Second, unilateral good measures in phase one should be evolved into reciprocal measures in phase two. Since substantial measures are taken under phase two, unilateral measures can cause North Korea to step up its leverage over South Korea and take advantage of strategic superiority, making Indo-Korean cooperation harder.
Right. Two things to think about then, as you just mentioned, Professor Ban. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, Professor Ban, for today. Thank you so much for your insights, as always.
Thanks for having me.
And Celio here, thank you so much for your time and thoughts. Right, well, on that note, we end Press Perspective for this Monday. As always, thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow.